Chapter 4. Midnight Currents. The tower stairs felt longer than usual as Lyra descended, each step bringing her closer to the performance she must maintain throughout the midnight procession. Her newly fortified resolve remained strong, but the weight of what awaited, pretending devotion to a man using forbidden magic to manipulate her while thwarting his plans without revealing her awareness, pressed against her shoulders like a physical burden. As she rounded the spiral staircase's third turn, a shadow moved in the alcove below, a figure stepping into the amber lamplight with careful precision. Instinctively, her hands rose in defensive position, fire magic gathering at her fingertips.
"Peace,"
came a familiar voice, quiet but clear.
"It's only me."
The tension drained from her posture as Cassius emerged fully into the light, though he remained positioned to be invisible from either above or below their current position. He had changed from the simple attire he'd worn during their sanctuary, working into formal Spirit Guild robes of midnight blue, embroidered with silver symbols along the sleeves and collar. The color deepened the violet of his eyes, making them appear almost luminous in the stairwell's dim lighting.
"Cassius,"
she breathed, both relieved and concerned by his presence.
"You shouldn't be here. If anyone sees us together before the procession..."
"I know,"
he acknowledged, keeping his voice low.
"but there wasn't time to establish a safer meeting point, and what I've discovered couldn't wait until we're both in public view."
The urgency in his tone cut through Lyra's concerns about propriety. She moved closer, the magical connection they had established in the sanctuary humming to life with proximity, creating a subtle resonance between them that felt simultaneously novel and utterly natural.
"What is it?"
she asked, instinctively casting a minor sound-dampening charm around them, one of her own design that would blur their conversation to any casual listener on the stairs.
"3 things, none of them simple."
He replied, his expression grave.
"First, I found a way to potentially disrupt whatever working Alek intends to perform through the 5 ceremonial gates. The magical connection we established in the sanctuary created a template I can expand upon, a form of spiritual shielding that should prevent him from accessing your ancestral pathways without your conscious participation."
Hope flared within Lyra, quickly tempered by practical questions.
"From a distance. You'll be with the diplomatic contingent during the procession, nowhere near my position with Alek."
"Distance is less relevant to spirit magic than most assume,"
Cassius explained, a scholar's precision entering his voice despite their hurried circumstances.
"Our established connection provides an anchor point. I can extend a protective working from the Ember Sanctuary, the garden where we performed the seance. Its position at the city's northeastern quadrant creates a natural balance point to the procession's circular route."
The necklace pulsed with sudden heat against Lyra's throat, as if reacting to this direct threat to its function. She reinforced her mental shield automatically, a gesture that didn't escape Cassius's notice.
"Which brings me to the second matter,"
he continued, reaching into a small pouch at his belt and withdrawing something that caught the lamplight with an opalescent gleam.
"This is a moon opal, rare even among Spirit Guild artifacts. Its crystalline structure resonates specifically with ancestral communication magic."
He extended his palm, revealing a stone approximately half the size of the central fire opal in her necklace. Unlike the warm amber red of Alek's gift, this gem shifted between silver and pale blue, depending on how the light struck it, with occasional flashes of violet reminiscent of Cassius's eyes.
"It's beautiful,"
Lyra observed, resisting the urge to touch it immediately.
"but how does it help our situation?"
"It can serve as an interceptor if integrated with the existing necklace.
He explained.
The fire opals are currently creating a one-way channel from your ancestral connections to Alek's control. This stone, properly positioned, would essentially split that channel, redirecting a portion of the energy flow away from his influence."
The necklace flared with aggressive heat at this explanation, causing Lyra to wince slightly before regaining her composure.
"You want me to add it to the necklace? How?"
"It needs direct contact with the central stone,"
Cassius said, studying the fire opals with professional focus.
The setting appears to have small gaps between the metal and gemstone, a common feature in magical jewelry to allow energy flow. If positioned in one of these gaps, touching both the metal and the fire opal directly,
It could infiltrate the existing enchantment structure.
Lyra concluded, her scholarly mind immediately grasping the magical theory behind his suggestion.
Using the necklace's own design against it.
exactly.
His expression softened momentarily with something like admiration, before returning to serious focus.
But there's significant risk. The necklace will resist any attempt to modify its function. The moment the moon opal makes contact, you'll likely experience intense effects.
More intense than what I'm already managing?
Lyra asked with a touch of grim humor, her hand rising unconsciously to the central stone where the small crack had formed.
Potentially, yes.
Cassius confirmed soberly.
The necklace's enchantment appears designed to escalate its influence when threatened. Adding the moon opal would constitute a direct challenge to its core function.
Lyra weighed the options quickly, her analytical mind assessing risks against potential benefits.
The physical effects are manageable, as long as my thoughts remain shielded.
She decided.
And if the moon opal can disrupt whatever Alek intends to channel through me during the procession,
She extended her hand palm upward.
I'll do it.
The necklace pulsed violently as Cassius placed the moon opal in her palm, the heat intensifying as if the jewelry somehow sensed the threat approaching. Lyra closed her fingers around the stone, feeling its curious coolness. Not cold exactly, but a gentle absence of heat that contrasted sharply with the fire opal's aggressive warmth.
There's one more thing you should know
Cassius said, his voice dropping even lower.
about the necklace itself.
Something in his tone warned Lyra that this final piece of information would be the most difficult.
Tell me.
I've analyzed the binding enchantment more thoroughly.
He explained, his expression grave.
The clasp didn't simply disappear, it transformed into an integral part of the necklace's magical structure. It can only be released in two ways, either by the original caster willingly removing the enchantment,
Alek?
Lyra supplied, already suspecting the alternative.
or upon the wearer's death.
Cassius confirmed, his violet eyes reflecting genuine concern.
The enchantment is designed to persist beyond ordinary countermeasures. Even if we successfully disrupt whatever working he's attempting during the procession, the necklace itself will remain unless he chooses to remove it.
The implications settled heavily between them. Not just a temporary hindrance to be overcome during tonight's ceremony, but a lasting constraint that would bind her to Alek's influence until he deliberately released her, or until more permanent solutions became necessary. Rather than despair, Lyra felt a curious calm descend. The situation's parameters were now clearly defined, the challenges explicitly named.
Then we focus on tonight's immediate objective.
She stated with quiet determination.
Disrupting his working during the procession. Proving his use of forbidden enchantments. Creating circumstances where removing the necklace becomes his best option.
Cassius studied her with that perceptive gaze that seemed to see beyond surface composure to the complex emotions beneath.
Most would be overwhelmed by such revelations.
I had my moment of breakdown earlier.
Lyra admitted, recalling her tears in the tower room.
It served its purpose. Now clarity serves me better.
Something shifted in his expression. A deepening respect mingled with another emotion she couldn't quite name, but which resonated through their connection with surprising warmth.
We should proceed separately.
He said after a moment, practical concerns reasserting themselves.
I'll return to the diplomatic contingent and make my way to the Ember Sanctuary once the procession begins.
And I'll join Alek at the assembly point.
Lyra agreed, looking down at the moon opal still cupped in her palm.
When should I add this to the necklace?
Just before the procession begins.
Cassius advised.
Once we're all in position, but before Alek can fully activate whatever working he's planned. The moment of transition from preparation to action will provide the best opportunity to introduce an unexpected variable.
The practical exchange felt strangely intimate. Two strategists aligned in purpose, their different magical approaches complementing rather than conflicting. The connection they had established in the sanctuary hummed between them, responsive to their proximity yet requiring no conscious effort to maintain.
Be careful.
Cassius added softly, the formal phrase transformed by genuine concern.
The moon opal should provide some protection, but the necklace's reaction will still be substantial.
I understand.
Lyra assured him, closing her fingers around the stone again before securing it in a hidden pocket within her ceremonial robes.
And you? The protective working from the sanctuary will draw considerable energy. Don't overextend yourself.
His mouth curved into that rare smile that transformed his scholarly features.
Spirit mages are trained to navigate the boundary between worlds without losing themselves. I'll manage.
The double meaning wasn't lost on Lyra, his reassurance applying not just to magical exertion, but to their unusual partnership, crossing boundaries that generations of guild separation had declared dangerous. The necklace pulsed against her throat, objecting to even this brief moment of connection. With no more time to spare, they parted ways, Cassius slipping back into the shadows of the alcove where a concealed side passage would return him to the diplomatic wing, Lyra continuing her descent toward where Alek and the procession officials awaited. As she moved through the final turns of the spiral staircase, she found herself drawing strength from the brief encounter, not just from the practical strategy they had developed, but from the stark contrast it presented to her upcoming interaction with Alek. With Cassius, every exchange felt balanced, information freely shared, abilities respectfully acknowledged, choices consciously offered rather than manipulated or demanded. The assembly area for the midnight procession sprawled across the western courtyard, transformed by festival decorations into a tableau of Fire Guild opulence. Enchanted flame sculptures illuminated the space, dragons with wings of living fire, phoenixes whose tail feathers shifted color with each movement, abstract spirals of interwoven heat currents that created hypnotic patterns in the night air. Guild officials in formal attire directed participants into their assigned positions with practiced efficiency. Musicians tuned heat-sensitive instruments that would accompany the procession with traditional melodies. Apprentices in ceremonial robes practiced the simple flame workings they would perform at designated points along the route. And at the center of this elaborate preparation stood Alek Brightforge, resplendent in his ceremonial robes that perfectly matched her own. The copper-gold fabric captured and amplified the ambient firelight, creating the impression that he himself was the source of illumination. His posture projected confident authority, his expression one of benevolent command as he issued final instructions to the fire mages who would lead specific segments of the procession. Several guild elders hovered nearby, their attentive poses and respectful nods revealing how thoroughly Alek had secured their admiration. Even Guild Master Vorin, typically resistant to those not born to established fire lineages, appeared impressed by whatever Alek was explaining. His usual dour expression softened into something approaching approval. As Lyra approached, Alek turned as if sensing her presence, his golden eyes finding her immediately among the crowd. His smile shifted from the generic pleasantness he offered the guild officials to something more personal, more targeted. A calculated warmth designed to make her feel specially acknowledged. Once, that smile might have affected her, particularly when amplified by the necklace's enchantment. Now, with the spirit shield protecting her thoughts and the moon opal heavy in her pocket, she saw it for what it was. A performance, precise and practiced, designed to elicit specific responses that served his purposes.
Lyra,
He greeted, extending his hand with formal grace as she reached him.
you look magnificent. The Embersong fire truly burns bright in you tonight.
The guild elders murmured appreciative agreement, their eyes taking in her ceremonial attire with approval. She accepted Alek's hand with practiced poise, maintaining her outward role of willing fiancé, while her mind remained clear behind its protective shield.
The festival brings out the best in us all.
She replied diplomatically, including the elders in her response, rather than focusing exclusively on Alek. A subtle deviation from expected behavior that would likely pass unnoticed, but satisfied her growing need for small rebellions. If Alek noticed this minor independence, he gave no sign, smoothly drawing her closer to explain the final procession arrangements.
We've made some adjustments to the traditional route,
He informed her, gesturing toward a large map displayed on a nearby table.
The 5 ceremonial gates will be activated in a specific sequence this year, creating a perfect pentagram across Pyreholm's layout.
The visual representation confirmed what the ancestral spirits had warned. Alek had carefully arranged the procession route to create a specific magical pattern, one that would maximize whatever working the incomplete Crown of Cinders required. Traditional festival celebrations followed city planning without particular attention to geometric precision. This deliberate pentagram was anything but traditional.
An innovative approach.
Lyra commented, her tone revealing nothing of her internal assessment.
Was this your suggestion?
A collaborative design.
Alek replied smoothly, though the subtle pride in his voice betrayed his primary authorship.
The elders agreed it would honor Pyreholm's 5 founding families more appropriately than the conventional circuit.
Guildmaster Voren nodded solemnly.
Lord Brightforge has shown remarkable insight into our historical traditions for someone not born to them. The pentagram route reconnects modern celebration with ancient symbolism in ways we had overlooked.
The careful phrasing suggested Alek had presented his magical working as a return to historical practices, rather than an innovation. A clever approach when dealing with tradition-bound elders who resisted obvious change, while remaining susceptible to appeals about reclaiming forgotten heritage.
I'm honored to participate in such a meaningful revision,
Lyra said, the words technically true while her actual meaning remained private. Meaningful indeed, though not in the way Alek had convinced the elders to believe. The necklace pulsed warmly against her throat as Alek placed his hand on the small of her back, guiding her toward their position at the front of the assembling procession. His touch was properly formal for a public setting, yet carried a subtle possessiveness that sent an involuntary shiver along her spine. Partly the necklace's enchantment creating artificial response, partly her own genuine discomfort with his presumption.
Tonight marks the true beginning of our union,
He said, his voice pitched for her ears alone as they walked.
The formal ceremony tomorrow will merely confirm what we established through shared magic this evening.
The statement held ominous implications beyond its surface romantic sentiment. The necklace warmed against her skin, attempting to create emotional receptivity to his words that the spirit shield prevented from reaching her thoughts.
The procession has always held special significance,
She replied carefully, maintaining her diplomatic facade.
each gate representing a different aspect of Fire Guild heritage.
Indeed,
Alek agreed, his golden eyes gleaming with inner fire that had nothing to do with festival illumination.
though few truly understand how those aspects can be unified into something greater than their separate expressions. Your ancestor Marielle wrote quite eloquently on the subject, I believe.
The casual reference to Lyra Embersong's private journals, records secured in the sealed archives section they had visited earlier, confirmed Lyra's suspicion that Alek's research into the Crown of Cinders extended far beyond casual interest. He had somehow accessed family records that should have been available only to Embersong blood relations.
You've studied my family's historical writings?
She asked, allowing appropriate surprise to color her tone while keeping her deeper suspicions masked.
Thoroughly.
Alek replied with evident satisfaction.
As your future husband, I considered it essential to understand the Embersong legacy in all its dimensions. Your father graciously provided access to certain family archives during our engagement negotiations.
Without consulting me, Lyra thought but didn't say, filing this information for later consideration. Her father's decision to grant Alek access to family records, while withholding that same privilege from her fiancé's own scrutiny, revealed troubling blind spots in High Councilor Embersong's legendary political acumen. They reached the procession's starting position, an elevated platform at the western gate where they would be visible to the gathered crowds as they performed the first ceremonial lighting. Guild officials bustled around them, making final adjustments to their robes, checking the positioning of enchanted flame basins, confirming timing with musicians, and supporting mages. Throughout these preparations, Alek maintained constant proximity to Lyra, his hand at her back, his shoulder brushing hers, his attention returning to her face between instructions to subordinates. The behavior presented as attentive devotion to observers. Lyra recognized it as strategic reinforcement of the necklace's enchantment, each touch strengthening the magical influence while establishing his dominant position in their public presentation. The contrast with Cassius's respectful distance couldn't have been sharper. Where Alek imposed closeness to assert control, Cassius had offered space while maintaining connection. Where Alek's touch carried implicit ownership, Cassius had requested explicit permission before even the most necessary physical contact. Where Alek projected authority that demanded acknowledgement, Cassius had shared knowledge that invited collaboration. The necklace flared with sudden heat as these comparisons formed in her mind, sending a wave of inappropriate physical sensation through her body that momentarily disrupted her composed expression. Alek noticed immediately, misinterpreting her reaction as response to his proximity rather than resistance to his influence.
The ceremonial robes affect everyone this way,
He murmured, his voice dropping to an intimate register that carried suggestion beneath its surface reassurance.
The enchantments woven into the fabric are designed to heighten magical sensitivity in preparation for the working ahead.
His explanation provided convenient cover for the necklace's effects, while revealing nothing of their true source. Lyra managed a smile that could be interpreted as grateful acknowledgement, focusing on maintaining her outward performance while strengthening her internal barriers.
10 minutes until processional commencement,
Announced the ceremony master, a senior guild official responsible for festival timing.
Primary participants, please take your positions for final preparations.
This was the transition moment Cassius had identified. The shift from arrangement to action when introducing the moon opal would be most effective and least noticeable. As Alek turned to receive last-minute instructions from the ceremony master, Lyra took the opportunity to retrieve the stone from her hidden pocket, keeping it concealed within her palm. She touched the necklace with her free hand, as if adjusting it for comfort, a natural gesture that would draw no particular attention amidst the various preparations happening around them. Under cover of this movement, she carefully positioned the moon opal against the gap between the central fire opal and its metal setting, pressing gently until she felt it make contact with both elements. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. The necklace blazed with heat that would have been painful had her fire mage training not included resistance to high temperatures. Even with that protection, the sudden intensity of sensation that crashed through her body nearly buckled her knees. The spirit shield around her thoughts held firm, but her physical form responded with shocking vulnerability to the enchantment's desperate counterattack. Waves of inappropriate heat cascaded from her throat downward, pooling in her core with such force that she had to bite her lip to prevent an audible response. Her skin flushed, her breath shortened, her pulse accelerated to a pace that had nothing to do with the modest physical exertion of preparation, and everything to do with the necklace's frantic attempt to overwhelm her resistance through sheer physical distraction. Through this assault on her senses, Lyra felt something else occurring. A subtle but significant shift in the necklace's magical structure as the moon opal integrated with its enchantment. Where the fire opals had created a one-way channel from her ancestral connections outward to Alek's control, the spirit stone was establishing a secondary pathway, diverting a portion of that energy flow toward the connection she shared with Cassius instead. The sensation was peculiar, like feeling a river suddenly split around a newly formed island, part of its current continuing along the original course, while another portion carved a different route entirely. The division created momentary turbulence as the competing flows established new patterns, which translated physically into the intense reactions currently overwhelming her senses.
Lyra?
Alek's voice penetrated her awareness, concern evident in his tone as he returned his attention to her.
Are you well?
She forced her eyes open. When had she closed them? To find him studying her with sharp focus, his golden gaze assessing her flushed appearance with a mixture of public solicitousness and private calculation.
Quite well.
She managed, her voice remarkably steady despite the continuing tumult of physical sensation.
As you said, the ceremonial preparations affect everyone this way.
His eyes narrowed slightly, something in her response triggering a momentary suspicion that she hurriedly covered with a smile more befitting an eager bride-to-be.
The robes are particularly potent this year. I find myself quite affected by the traditional enchantments.
This explanation seemed to satisfy him, but Lyra could still detect a flicker of suspicion in his golden eyes. With the moon opal now integrated into the necklace, she couldn't risk him examining it too closely. She needed a more convincing distraction. Drawing on every performance skill she'd developed through years of political navigation, Lyra reached up to touch Alek's face, her fingers lightly tracing his cheekbone in a gesture of intimate affection that would appear perfectly natural to observers while serving her strategic purpose.
Your eyes,
she murmured, maintaining unbroken eye contact as she spoke.
They capture the ceremonial flames so beautifully, like molten gold carrying living fire.
Inwardly, she cringed at both the contact and the flowery compliment, so unlike her usual measured speech. But the performance achieved its purpose. Alek's expression shifted immediately from scrutiny to satisfaction, his suspicion entirely replaced by pleased vanity.
Good,
he said, the single word carrying layers of meaning as his hand returned to the small of her back.
Heightened sensitivity will serve the working ahead.
Not in the way you intend, Lyra thought behind her mental shield, focusing on steadying her breathing as the initial shock of the moon opal's integration began to stabilize into a new equilibrium. The physical sensations remained intense, but were becoming manageable as her body adjusted to the altered magical flow.
1 minute to procession commencement.
Called the ceremony master.
Positions, everyone?
Around them, the final preparations reached completion. Musicians took their places, instruments tuned to the specific harmonic frequencies that would accompany each gate activation. Fire mages assigned to the procession's various segments formed their designated patterns, ceremonial torches unlit but ready. Guild elders arranged themselves in order of seniority, with Lyra's father, conspicuously late in arriving, taking his position of prominence among them. Across the crowded courtyard, Lyra caught a glimpse of Zara standing near her father, her festival committee attire, allowing her legitimate proximity to the High Councilor during the ceremonies. Their eyes met briefly, a subtle nod, exchanging confirmation that both were in position according to their hastily formulated plan. In the distance, the first bell of midnight began to toll across Pyreholm, 12 resonant notes that would mark the official commencement of the midnight procession. With each sonorous tone, Alek's posture straightened incrementally, his focus sharpening, his magical presence intensifying in preparation for whatever working he had designed the procession route to facilitate. Lyra matched his formal stance while her mind remained separate from the performance, protected by the spirit shield, and now augmented by the moon opal's intervention in the necklace's enchantment. As the final bell tone faded into expectant silence, she allowed herself one brief thought of Cassius, likely reaching the Ember Sanctuary now, preparing to extend protective working through their established connection. The necklace pulsed in objection to this thought, sending another wave of distracting heat through her body. But beneath that reaction, Lyra felt something new. A cool counterpoint flowing through the secondary channel the moon opal had created, like a refreshing breeze finding its way through an overheated room.
Citizens of Pyreholm!
Alec's voice rang out, magically amplified to reach the assembled crowds.
Tonight we honor tradition, while forging new bonds that will strengthen our guild for generations to come.
The ceremonial opening had begun. Whatever working Alek had designed, whatever purpose the incomplete Crown of Cinders served in his ambitions, the next hours would reveal its full extent, and test whether Lyra's preparations would be sufficient to counter it. As they turned together toward the first ceremonial gate, preparing to ignite its basin with the combined working that would initiate the procession, Lyra felt the distinctive resonance of Cassius's magic touch her consciousness through the moon opal's newly established pathway. Distant but clear, a silent confirmation that he had reached the sanctuary and begun his protective working. The necklace flared with heat once more, its enchantment struggling against this unexpected intrusion. Lyra maintained her composed exterior while internally balancing between three distinct magical currents: the necklace's aggressive influence, Cassius's supportive connection, and her own determined resistance. The complexity was dizzying yet oddly clarifying, like a musical chord whose individual notes remained distinct while creating something greater than their separate sounds. Whatever happened in the hours ahead, she was no longer facing it alone or undefended. The moon opal's cool presence against the fire opal's heat served as constant reminder that even the most carefully constructed enchantments could be adapted, diverted, and potentially, eventually, overcome. With this thought firmly anchored behind her mental shield, Lyra stepped forward alongside Alek to begin the midnight procession. Her hand extended toward the ceremonial basin with perfect formal grace, while her true intentions remained her own. The first gate stood at Pyreholm's western edge, where the main boulevard met the outer defensive wall. Unlike the plain functional opening used for daily traffic, the ceremonial gate was a magnificent archway of obsidian and gold, its surface covered with intricate carvings depicting the Fire Guild's founding. At its center, a massive basin of hammered copper waited to receive the inaugural flame that would begin the midnight procession. Crowds lined the route, their faces illuminated by handheld flame lanterns that created a sea of flickering light stretching into the distance. Guild officials maintained order with practiced efficiency, while musicians positioned at intervals prepared to accompany the procession with traditional melodies that would shift in tone and tempo as they moved through each gate. Lyra stood beside Alek before the unlit basin, their position elevated on a small platform to ensure visibility. Her ceremonial robes mirrored his, the matching designs emphasizing their imminent union, while the subtle crown motifs embedded in the embroidery hinted at Alek's true ambitions. His hand remained at the small of her back, the seemingly affectionate gesture serving as both public display and private reinforcement of the necklace's influence.
Citizens of Pyreholm,
Intoned the ceremony master, his magically amplified voice carrying across the assembled crowd.
we begin the sacred journey through our city's heart, honoring the 5 founding families whose vision established our guild's prominence. Lord Brightforge and Magister Embersong will ignite the first flame, symbolizing the union of their distinguished lineages.
The gathered spectators responded with appreciative murmurs, completely unaware that what appeared to be joyful tradition concealed a dangerous magical working. Only Lyra, with her spirit-shielded thoughts and the moon opal's cool presence against the fire opal's heat, recognized the true purpose behind Alek's carefully designed procession route.
Together,
Alek said quietly, the word meant for her alone as he extended his hand, palm upward, in the traditional position for shared magical working. Lyra placed her hand atop his, their fingers interlacing in the formal pattern taught to young mages learning cooperative casting. The position required intimate magical contact, core energies meeting directly rather than merely combining their external effects. The moment their magical signatures touched, Lyra felt Alek's power surge toward hers with uncomfortable intensity, not merely joining, but seeking to envelop, to direct, to channel. Unlike the harmonious resonance she had experienced with Cassius, this interaction carried inherent dominance, his magic attempting to access her ancestral connections through the pathway the necklace had established. The necklace flared with heat, its enchantment strengthening in response to direct magical contact with its creator. But beneath that burning sensation, Lyra felt the moon opal activate, its cool energy creating the secondary channel that would redirect a portion of the magical flow away from Alek's control. Together, they extended their joined hands toward the ceremonial basin. Fire bloomed from their fingertips. Alek's a bold, commanding gold. Lyra's a more precise, detailed crimson. The flames combined in midair, spiraling together before striking the basin with dramatic impact that drew appreciative gasps from the crowd. As the basin ignited, Lyra felt something shift within the magical current flowing between them. Where Alek intended all the power to channel through the necklace into whatever working the Crown of Cinders required, a significant portion suddenly diverted, like a stream encountering an unexpected tributary that carried water away from its intended course. Alek's expression flickered momentarily with confusion, his golden eyes narrowing as he sensed the deviation without understanding its source. His grip on her hand tightened fractionally, his magic pushing more insistently against hers as if trying to correct an inexplicable error in the working. Simultaneously, through the connection the moon opal had established, Lyra felt a sharp jolt of pain that wasn't her own. A sudden impact of redirected magical energy striking Cassius in the Ember Sanctuary. The sensation was so unexpected and intense that she nearly gasped aloud, maintaining her composed expression only through years of practiced self-control. The pain faded quickly, replaced by a sense of determined focus that she recognized as Cassius absorbing and dispersing the redirected power. But beneath that disciplined response lingered the unmistakable impression of physical damage, like a bruise forming beneath the skin, invisible to observers but acutely present to the one experiencing it. He didn't tell me the redirection would harm him, Lyra realized with dismay, understanding now why Cassius had been so careful to frame his protective working in technical terms, rather than personal consequences.
The first gate is lit,
Announced the ceremony master as the basin's flames stabilized into a towering pillar of fire.
the procession begins.
Musicians struck up the traditional melody as Alek and Lyra descended from the platform to lead the assembled dignitaries along the route to the second gate. The crowd parted before them, offering respectful bows and scattered applause as they passed.
Something interfered with the working.
Alek murmured, his voice pitched to reach her ears alone as they walked side by side. His tone remained pleasant for any observers, but Lyra detected the sharp edge of suspicion beneath.
Did you feel it?
I felt our magics join beautifully,
She replied, deflecting rather than directly lying.
though the ceremonial basin seemed to absorb more energy than tradition usually requires.
This explanation appeared to satisfy him temporarily, his suspicion redirected toward the ceremonial equipment, rather than her direct involvement.
Perhaps. We'll adjust our approach at the next gate.
The procession wound through Pyreholm's western district, passing illuminated buildings where citizens not attending directly watched from balconies and windows. Fire dancers performed along the route, their choreographed movements creating ephemeral sculptures of flame that lingered briefly in the night air before dissipating. Through it all, Lyra maintained her poised exterior, while her awareness extended along the magical connection to Cassius. The impression of injury remained, a dull ache centered somewhere in his upper chest, like a blow that had struck with significant force but not catastrophic damage. She sensed him adjusting his position in the sanctuary, reinforcing whatever protective working he had established in preparation for the next gate. The second gate stood at the northwestern vertex of the pentagram Alek had designed, traditionally representing the Earth Guild border before the formal separation of elemental territories. Its architecture incorporated stone elements alongside the typical Fire Guild materials, a nod to historical cooperation now largely forgotten in official histories. As they approached, Lyra felt the moon opal pulse once against the fire opals, its cool energy seeming to gather strength for the coming working. The necklace responded with increased heat, its enchantment struggling against this unexpected resistance.
The second gate honors endurance and foundation.
The ceremony master proclaimed as Alek and Lyra took their positions before another massive basin.
The strength that supports the flame's ambition.
Lyra noted the subtle emphasis on foundation, one of the components of the Crown of Cinders the ancestors had identified as already in Alek's possession. The earth element portion, integrated somehow into whatever working he was attempting to complete through the procession.
Together,
Alek said again, extending his hand with more determination than before. When their fingers interlaced this time, Lyra felt his magic push against hers with increased forcefulness, not merely combining, but actively seeking to subsume her contribution into his direction. The necklace burned against her throat, its enchantment amplifying as Alek drew on whatever portion of the crown he already possessed. As their joined magic ignited the second gate's basin, Lyra felt the moon opal activate more powerfully than before, diverting a larger portion of the magical current away from Alek's intended channel. Through their connection, she sensed Cassius brace himself an instant before the redirected energy struck him with significant force. The impact was worse this time, a crushing sensation across his back that momentarily stole his breath. Lyra felt his pain as a sympathetic echo through their connection, along with his determined effort to absorb and disperse the power without allowing it to rebound back toward her. The basin erupted with impressive flames that drew appreciative sounds from the crowd, but Lyra barely registered their reaction. Her awareness focused on the growing injury she could sense through their connection. Whatever protective working Cassius had established, it required him to physically absorb the magical backlash that would otherwise have flowed through the necklace to Alek's control.
The second gate is lit,
Declared the ceremony master.
The procession continues.
As they moved toward the third gate, Lyra detected a subtle shift in Alek's demeanor, his pleasant expression hardening around the edges, his golden eyes taking on a calculating intensity as he scanned the crowd and then the night sky, as if searching for the source of interference. His hand at her back pressed more firmly, his magical presence expanding around her in a way that felt less like partnership and more like attempted containment.
something is definitely disrupting the working.
He said, his voice still carefully modulated but carrying an undertone of irritation that hadn't been present before.
A magical current I can't quite identify is intercepting a portion of the flow.
Lyra adopted a concerned expression that masked her internal determination.
Could it be ambient festival energies? So many mages performing simultaneously throughout the city.
No,
Alek replied, his certainty chilling.
this is deliberate, targeted.
His golden eyes fixed on the necklace briefly before returning to her face with renewed scrutiny.
Have you noticed anything unusual about your family heirloom tonight?
The question carried dangerous implications, both his reference to the necklace as a family heirloom rather than his gift, and his specific interest in potential changes to its function. Lyra touched the central stone with practiced casualness, as if simply adjusting it for comfort.
It feels particularly warm against festival magic,
She observed truthfully.
though that's to be expected with so many elemental workings occurring simultaneously.
Alek's eyes narrowed slightly, but the approaching third gate prevented further questioning as the ceremony master called for their attention. This gate stood at the northeastern point of the pentagram, traditionally associated with transitions and fluidity, concepts usually connected to water magic rather than fire,
The third gate honors adaptation and flow,
intoned the ceremony master.
the movement that gives flame its dance and life.
Again, Lyra noted the terminology that aligned with the ancestral warning. Fluidity representing the water component of the crown that Alek had somehow acquired. The pattern was becoming clearer with each gate, his working gradually activating the 3 elements he controlled, while using her ancestral connections to compensate for the missing air and spirit components.
Together,
Alek stated, the word now carrying command rather than invitation as he extended his hand. Their joined magic flowed toward the basin with increased intensity. Alek's power pushing against the diversion created by the moon opal with growing frustration. As the 3rd gate ignited, Lyra felt the redirected energy strike Cassius with brutal force, this time across his left shoulder and arm, the impact leaving a sense of deep bruising that would significantly limit movement. Through their connection, she sensed him stagger slightly before regaining his balance, one hand bracing against the sanctuary's central basin for support. The protective working held, but at increasing physical cost that she hadn't anticipated when accepting his help. He didn't tell you the redirection would harm him. She projected through their connection, concern and frustration mingling in her thoughts as she maintained her outward performance in the procession. No direct response came. Their connection wasn't developed enough for precise communication at this distance, but she felt a general impression of determined reassurance, as if he were acknowledging her concern, while indicating acceptance of the necessary sacrifice.
The 3rd gate is lit.
The ceremony master's voice barely penetrated Lyra's awareness as she struggled to balance between her public role, her resistance to Alek's increasingly aggressive magical pressure, and her growing concern for Cassius's well-being. As the procession continued toward the 4th gate, Alek's composure noticeably deteriorated. The pleasant mask he presented to observers remained in place, but his magical presence had taken on an agitated quality that pressed against her senses with uncomfortable intensity. His gaze swept the surrounding area with predatory focus, seeking the source of interference with growing irritation.
Someone is sabotaging the working,
He stated flatly, his voice still pitched for privacy, but carrying an edge that hadn't been present earlier.
The energy flow is being diverted before reaching its intended culmination.
Lyra maintained her innocently concerned expression.
Perhaps we should consult the ceremony master. If there's a technical problem with the traditional workings.
This is no technical problem.
Alek interrupted, his control slipping enough to reveal genuine anger before he mastered it again.
This is deliberate interference.
His golden eyes fixed on her with uncomfortable intensity.
Are you experiencing any unusual sensations through your ancestral connections? Any presence that doesn't belong?
The direct question approached dangerous territory. Lyra touched the necklace again, using the gesture to center herself before responding.
Only the traditional awareness of ancestors observing important ceremonies?
She replied, the answer technically accurate while concealing the specific communications she had received in the sanctuary. Alek's expression suggested he wasn't entirely satisfied with her response, but they had reached the 4th gate, the southeastern point of the pentagram, traditionally associated with inspiration and intellect. Like the previous gates, its design incorporated subtle references to the element it represented. In this case, air symbols rarely acknowledged in modern Fire Guild architecture.
The 4th gate honors vision and breath.
The ceremony master announced, his formal tones carrying across the assembled crowd.
The inspiration that gives flame its purpose and direction.
Lyra noted that unlike the previous gates, this one referenced an element Alek didn't possess according to the ancestral warning. Air's breath still missing from his incomplete crown. This gate would likely reveal whether his working could function with substituted power rather than the original elemental components.
Together?
Alek said, the word now an unmistakable command rather than request as he extended his hand. When their fingers interlaced this time, Lyra felt his magic surge against hers with barely restrained force. Not merely seeking to direct, but to overwhelm. To dominate completely. The necklace burned against her throat with uncomfortable intensity, as Alek drew heavily on whatever portions of the crown he possessed, attempting to compensate for the continuing diversion of energy. As their joined magic ignited the fourth gate's basin, Lyra felt the moon opal pulse strongly against the fire opals, redirecting an even larger portion of the magical current away from Alek's control. Through their connection, she sensed Cassius center himself an instant before the redirected energy struck him with devastating impact, this time across his right leg and hip, the force nearly buckling his stance in the sanctuary. The pain that echoed through their connection was sharp enough that Lyra's breath caught visibly, a reaction Alek immediately noticed despite the crowd's appreciative response to the impressively illuminated gate.
What is it?
He demanded, his tone still publicly appropriate but carrying unmistakable suspicion.
What did you feel just now?
A momentary surge in the working.
Lyra managed, recovering her composed expression.
The fourth gate seems to draw more deeply on personal reserves than the others.
Alek's golden eyes studied her with dangerous intensity, his gaze moving from her face to the necklace and back again.
Indeed,
He replied, the single word carrying layers of meaning beyond its surface agreement.
personal reserves are precisely what concerns me.
As the ceremony master announced the successful lighting and the procession began moving toward the final gate, Lyra felt Alek's magical presence expand around her like an invisible cage, not attacking directly, but establishing boundaries that would make further interference more difficult. His hand at her back had shifted from formal guidance to unmistakable possession, his fingers pressing against her spine with subtle but significant force. Through the moon opal's connection, Lyra extended her awareness toward Cassius, finding his presence fainter than before, still determined, but increasingly strained by the physical toll of absorbing repeated magical impacts. She sensed him preparing for the final and likely most powerful redirection, his protective working reinforced despite the pain evident through their connection. The fifth gate stood at the southern point of the pentagram, completing the geometric pattern Alek had designed. Unlike the other gates, which incorporated subtle references to various elements, this one was purely Fire Guild architecture, imposing, dramatic, and unapologetically dominant in its symbolism,
The fifth gate honors mastery and culmination,
intoned the ceremony master.
the sovereignty that gives flame its ultimate authority and power.
The phrasing sent a chill through Lyra despite the ambient heat of the festival celebrations. This final gate represented the central binding element of the crown, the fire component that Alek sought to use as the controlling force over all others, including her Embersong ancestral connections.
Together,
Alek stated, the word now stripped of all pretense as he extended his hand with unmistakable command. When their fingers interlaced for the final working, Lyra felt his magic crash against hers with bruising force. All subtlety abandoned in favor of raw power seeking total dominance. The necklace burned against her throat with such intensity that it would have been painful even to a fire mage accustomed to extreme heat. The enchantment pulsed in aggressive rhythm, attempting to overwhelm the moon opal's influence and re-establish complete control over the magical pathways. As their joined magic approached the final basin, Lyra felt the moon opal flare with unexpected strength, its cool energy pushing back against the fire opal's heat with determination that matched Cassius's presence in her awareness. The redirected current grew to nearly half the total magical flow, diverting a critical portion of the working away from Alek's control at the moment of intended culmination. Through their connection, Lyra sensed Cassius brace himself an instant before the redirected energy struck with catastrophic force, this time directly to his chest, the impact driving him to his knees in the sanctuary. The pain that echoed through their connection was so severe that Lyra physically flinched, her hand trembling noticeably within Alek's grip. The fifth gate ignited with impressive visual dramatics that satisfied the observing crowd, but Lyra could feel the working's fundamental failure beneath the surface display. Where Alek had intended a complete circuit that would activate all 3 crown components while using her ancestral connections to compensate for the missing elements, the Moon Opal's intervention had created a critical disruption that prevented the magical culmination he sought.
The 5th gate is lit,
Declared the ceremony master, oblivious to the magical battle that had occurred beneath the visible working.
The midnight procession is complete.
As the crowd erupted in appreciative applause, Lyra felt Alek's hand tighten painfully around hers, his golden eyes now blazing with barely contained fury as he stared at the ceremonial basin. All pretense of pleasantness had vanished from his expression, replaced by cold calculation as he scanned their surroundings.
Something is interfering with the traditional energies.
He stated flatly, his voice deadly quiet beneath the celebration surrounding them.
The 5th connection should have sealed the pattern completely.
Seeing his agitation and recognizing an opportunity, Lyra leaned closer, adopting an expression of devoted concern as she placed her free hand against his chest in a gesture that would appear affectionate to observers.
What's wrong?
She asked, her voice gentle with practiced worry.
Did something disrupt the ceremony's meaning for us?
The performance was calculated to appeal to both his ego and his need for control, positioning her as the adoring fiancé concerned primarily with their relationship, rather than the magical technicalities. It also served to distract him from examining the necklace too closely, her body language drawing his attention to her face instead. Alek's gaze shifted from the basin to her, his anger momentarily tempered by her apparent devotion. For an instant, Lyra glimpsed something almost genuine in his expression, a flash of appreciation for what he perceived as unwavering loyalty, despite the working's failure.
The ceremonial energies were diverted somehow.
He explained, his tone softening slightly though the tension remained in his posture.
An external interference pattern disrupted what should have been a perfect culmination.
Before he could elaborate further, a guild official approached them with a formal bow, interrupting the potentially dangerous conversation.
Lord Brightforge,
The official announced with formal deference.
Guildmaster Voran requests your immediate presence regarding an unexpected diplomatic development. Most urgent, he emphasized.
For a moment, Alek seemed prepared to dismiss the interruption entirely, his focus fixed on Lyra with dangerous intensity. Then, with visible effort, he reassembled his public persona, the pleasant mask sliding back into place with practiced efficiency.
Of course.
He replied smoothly, releasing Lyra's hand with reluctance that wasn't entirely feigned.
Please inform Guildmaster Voran I'll join him momentarily.
The official bowed and retreated, leaving them in a momentary bubble of privacy, despite the celebrating crowds. He looked at Lyra and focused on the necklace before he turned and departed, his ceremonial robes sweeping dramatically around him as he followed the guild official toward whatever diplomatic matter had provided this convenient interruption. The timing was so perfect that Lyra suspected Zara or her father might have engineered it, though she couldn't be certain. What she was certain of was the growing urgency in her connection to Cassius. Through the Moon Opal's link, she sensed him struggling in the sanctuary, the accumulated damage from absorbing 5 increasingly powerful magical impacts having taken a severe physical toll. His presence in her awareness had weakened significantly, suggesting he might be approaching the limits of his endurance. Without conscious decision, Lyra found herself moving away from the celebration, not toward her tower or the guild complex, but in the direction of the northeastern conservatory that would lead to the Ember Sanctuary. Her formal role in the procession was complete. No one would question her temporary absence from the continuing festivities, particularly given the emotional significance often attributed to such ceremonies for their primary participants. As she navigated through the crowds, her pace increased from measured dignity to something approaching urgency. The necklace continued to pulse with heat against her throat, but its intensity had diminished slightly without Alek's direct magical presence reinforcing its enchantment. The moon opal remained cool against the central fire opal, its connection to Cassius growing stronger as she moved toward his physical location. By the time she reached the northeastern conservatory, Lyra had abandoned all pretense of casual movement. She hurried through the winding paths, past exotic flame flowers that bloomed in the festival night, her ceremonial robes gathered in one hand to prevent them catching on the ornamental foliage. The connection guided her unerringly toward the hidden entrance to the sanctuary, a sense of increasing urgency driving her forward despite the rational part of her mind that cautioned against revealing her knowledge of Cassius's location. At the living wall of fire vines that concealed the sanctuary entrance, Lyra paused briefly, her hand hovering over the activation point as doubt finally penetrated her emotional response. What was she doing? Racing to the aid of a spirit mage she barely knew, abandoning her public responsibilities during a major festival, risking discovery of their unconventional alliance, all because of a magical connection established mere hours ago? Yet beneath these rational concerns pulsed a deeper certainty. She couldn't ignore what she had felt through their connection. The physical damage Cassius had absorbed to protect her from Alek's working was real and potentially severe. He had willingly accepted that consequence without warning her, positioning himself as a living shield between her and magical manipulation. No one in her life had ever made such a sacrifice without political calculation or expectation of equivalent return. Not her father with his dynastic ambitions. Not Zara, for all her loyal friendship. Certainly not Alek, whose every gesture of affection served his larger schemes. Only Cassius had offered protection that cost him personally, while demanding nothing in exchange. The realization crystallized something that had been forming since their first meeting, a recognition that transcended guild boundaries and political complications. Whatever existed between them wasn't merely intellectual compatibility or temporary alliance against a common threat. It was something both simpler and more profound, something that had developed with unexpected speed, yet felt more authentic than relationships cultivated over years of careful political navigation. With this clarity, Lyra activated the sanctuary entrance, the fire vines parting to reveal the narrow passage beyond. As she moved through the crystalline tunnel with its refractive walls that created the impression of walking through frozen flame, tears began to form in her eyes. Part emotional response to the evening's intensity, part genuine concern for what she might find at the passage's end. Through their connection, she sensed Cassius's presence growing stronger but also more fragile, like a flame burning too brightly against dwindling fuel. The physical damage from absorbing 5 powerful magical impacts had accumulated beyond what Spirit Guild training, however advanced, could easily withstand. The tears flowed freely now as Lyra reached the sanctuary entrance, her composed facade finally surrendering to the emotional reality beneath. There was no going back, not to her carefully managed existence as the High Councilor's perfect daughter, not to the political marriage that had seemed inevitable just days ago, not to the isolated pursuit of knowledge that had defined her life before Cassius Nightshade had disrupted everything with his violet eyes and unorthodox theories. Whatever awaited beyond this threshold, whatever price they would both pay for defying centuries of guild separation and Alek's dangerous ambitions, Lyra knew with sudden certainty that she wouldn't face it alone. Not anymore.